So let me get started. My name is Steve Gordon. I'm currently the chair of the SIGHPC Education Chapter of ACM, and welcome to our webinar today on HPC Carpentry. So for those of you who are not SIGHPC members, it's my one plug I put in at the beginning of every webinar. We'd love you to join the chapter. It's a modest cost, $10 per year for professionals and $5 for students, and then you'll get notified of all of these webinars, access to other kinds of documents that we're putting together for the chapter, etc. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Andy Turner. And Andy, if you could introduce yourself and start your presentation.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. My name's Andy Turner. I work at EPCC at the University of Edinburgh. EPCC used to stand for the Edinburgh Parallel Computing Centre, but at some point back in the 2000s, we decided we'd be like IBM and just become a set of initials rather than an acronym, because that was the way the world was going. All that means now is that I have to explain what EPCC sort of used to mean every time I start a presentation. So apologies for the view of my kitchen behind me, but I work from home on a Monday due to childcare, so I'm presenting from my house today. So what I'm planning to do today is give you an overview of HPC Carpentry and where we're up to with that, what the plans are for the future, maybe how you can get involved in or use it if you're interested going forwards. So the slides I've got, I should give you a link at the end. They're all online, and you're able to use them again and change them and modify them as long as you give credit with a Creative Commons license. So firstly, I'd like to thank all these people without whom HPC Carpentry would exist. So there's a number of different people here. Everybody's put in a lot of effort and come together from a wide variety of different institutions, continents, even to get HPC Carpentry to the state it is today, where we've got a few different workshops running and there's a few different versions, and we'll talk about that, the coordination going forward. But all of these people are, if you know any of them directly and you want to ask them about HPC Carpentry, they're all happy to answer questions on the topic. They're also all available through the mailing list, which I'll have as well, which you can join and ask any further questions that occur to you after this webinar. So I'm going to cover what is HPC Carpentry, because some of you may or may not have come across carpentry before. I'm going to talk about some of the particular challenges that are associated with HPC Carpentry, what our current status is and what the plans are going forward, and then finally, how you could get involved in HPC Carpentry in various different ways in the future. So let's get back to the start. What is HPC Carpentry? Well, the idea behind HPC Carpentry was to apply the carpentry training model for HPC training. So for those of you who are maybe not familiar with carpentry and what it means, the website probably explains it much better than I can, but essentially it's a very practical focused way of learning to do things. So the reason it's carpentry is it's supposed to equip you directly with the tools relevant to advance your research. Okay, so one of the things that a lot of people are surprised at when they come along to a carpentry training is the lack, I guess, of background information and conceptual information. The idea is that you teach the practical skills first, and that builds up the right mental model for the attendees in the way you teach it, that the concepts arise naturally from the practice of actually doing rather than just learning. So rather than often traditional courses where you may have a series of lectures or presentations in slides, followed by some practical elements that teach you how to do things, in carpentry, all the participants in the room work along with the instructor in a practical way as the course goes on. And that is the model for learning. There are various other things that distinguish carpentry to do with how feedback is taken and acted on, directly within the session, within the workshops themselves as we're going along, and the number of people that you have to have helping out students, and the number of instructors and helpers you have to have. But please, if you want to know a bit more about the carpentry model and the way it's taught, go and have a look at the Carpentry's website. And also, even if you're not particularly interested in carpentry, but you are interested in teaching and training, I can highly recommend the Carpentry's instructor training, which is online and available for free. It's worth having a look at. It has a lot of information about the psychology of learning and how you can go about improving the way you teach these practical skills. The other thing that distinguishes carpentry is it's open source, community designed training. So all of the carpentry materials are available online in GitHub repository, public GitHub repositories for anybody who has an interest to contribute to. They are, of course, moderated contributions. There's set maintainers for each lesson that make sure that what people are putting in matches the training and the goals of the training. But they are open source, and anybody can take them and build on them in a way they see fit. One of the other goals for HPC Carpentry is that we'd make it easy to adapt for different systems, this is one of the bugbears of, especially in our introductory HPC training, is that every HPC system is quite differently set up. Okay, so it becomes quite a chore to take somebody else's training material and convert it for your own system, or it becomes quite tedious, even if it's quite mechanical. So we want to do something that was much easier to adapt for different systems. And we want to make it accessible to different audiences. So particularly, I think in this case, from people from a non-traditional HPC communities. So rather than the traditional computational science, hard communities like physics research and chemistry research, looking out more to the communities that haven't really been able to make use of HPC, but the potential is still there. So we've had carpentry sessions running with people from economics and business, for example, from the life sciences, who are actually almost mainstream, I guess, HPC users for many of us now, even though they weren't 5 years ago. But different communities like the arts and social sciences as well. So as part of this, HPC Carpentry has been rumbling along probably for quite a few years now, 5 years at least. There have been different efforts, and it's never quite crystallized. So one thing we've done recently is at the last supercomputing.
Hold on, Andy. Let me mute everybody except you and. Okay, Andy, go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things we did was the last supercomputing conference, we had a birds of a feather session to try and really crystallize what the learner profile would be for our initial HPC Carpentry offering, and ask for advice and the feelings of the community on what they wanted out of the training. So our initial learner profile, which came out of that workshop, covered a few different feelings of people. For people who weren't sure how HPC could help their research, they'd maybe heard of HPC and that it offered more computing power, but didn't know if it could directly help them. People who lacked the basic technical skills to use HPC. So the feeling of this is a very typical carpentry type thing. Just give me what I need to get on with my research. I'm not bothered particularly about the conceptual stuff. Just give me what I need, the tools I need. What is HPC and how does it differ from the sort of computers I'm already using, maybe my laptop or desktop or some sort of local workstation? And what is this thing called the cloud that I've heard of? And how does that relate to HPC? How can I help myself when I get stuck? Because one of the most dispiriting things about people who are new to HPC is they get on, they've got access to this thing, jump through all the hoops to get access, they get on, and something goes wrong straight away. And they don't know how to help themselves fix it. People who feel unsure and out of my depth with HPC, unwilling to experiment and try things and explore the opportunities available to them because they're just unsure about where they can go. People who don't understand what the shared nature of HPC systems and what particular challenges that presents to people. In use of a scheduler, for example, or the impact that different users can have on each other, for example, on login nodes or shared file systems. So the sort of topics that came out of the workshop, again, we discussed at the Birds of a Feather session, what sorts of topics should be included in HPC Carpentry. And what you would imagine, I guess, if you knew about HPC and you wanted to design an introductory lesson. Why would I use HPC? How do I log in and transfer data? Understanding HPC jargon, right? There's a lot of words thrown about in different contexts that people may not understand. A basic understanding of an HPC architectures and the practical implications. What does that mean for me? Why is the HPC system put together like that? And what impact does that have on my use of it? File systems on HPC systems. So there's often multiple file systems. They're shared and they have slightly different properties, often the storage systems that people are used to on their local systems. In terminal text editors, at least enough that people can do editing of job submission scripts and things like that, even if their major editing is done back on their local system before it's transferred up. Modules, environments and applications, and which people often don't have on their own system, and how you use them and the implications of them. Obviously, a big part of this is the scheduler, using the scheduler in different ways. And shared system etiquette was something that came across quite strongly in the BOF, that people thought that when you get these new users on, one of the things you really need to make sure they understand is what their responsibilities are to other users on the system and how they can behave in a way that helps both other people and themselves get the most out of the HPC systems. And finally, as I mentioned before, troubleshooting strategies. Researchers are clever people, independent people, right? The whole idea of being a researcher is that you're independent and you're the expert. So people are obviously uncomfortable when they run into problems and then can't sort it out for themselves, or at least have a go at sorting out for themselves before they ask for help. So having some basic troubleshooting strategies where people can help themselves before they have to turn to the help desk for help with using the system will make people a lot more comfortable with using HPC systems. So what about teaching the shell, right? This is one that comes up, it has come up again and again, and there's been lots of discussion about it, should we teach the shell? Do we assume that people know enough shell already when they come on an introductory course? I think almost everybody who's taught some sort of introductory level HPC courses fought with this in various guises. So generally, whether it's a need or not depends on the particular audience. Unfortunately, what often happens is that you have an audience which is so mixed that some people have never used the shell before, never used the command line before, and other people are quite happy with it. And so how do you marry those two things together? So what we're trying to do is use some sort of modular approach to add some flexibility here. And I'll talk in a bit more detail about what that actually means later on in the webinar. So the particular challenges associated with HPC Carpentry or introductory HPC teaching compared to other carpentry courses. So the other carpentry courses that exist are things like Software Carpentry, which does do an introduction to the shell, to version control, and an introductory level programming in Python, and Data Carpentry, which covers a wide range of topics from data cleaning and managing data sets to different tools for analyzing data. Okay, so what particular challenges does teaching HPC through carpentry? Right, so one of the things I've already mentioned is system differences. Right, so one of the big pains is that every system differs, every schedule is different, every file setup of multiple file systems is different, there's slight difference, every module environment is different on different HPC systems. And we need to be able to easy to incorporate these differences with minimal changes to the actual training material. So our plan is to do this as automatically as much as possible. And again, I'll mention a bit more about how we make this possible later on in the webinar. The idea is you set this configuration option once, and it's built with the correct settings automatically as much as possible. And the idea is that as the community grows and contributes more and more of these different configuration options, you get a wider and wider amount of different systems available within the training. So then it becomes very easy to customize it for your system, because the chances are quite high, once there's a lot in there, that there's some sort of configuration that matches the system you want to train people on. And one of the benefits of this is it could also be used to provide different research community flavors of the material. So you could have you could easily swap out, say, computational chemistry examples for life science examples, or for economics examples within the practical training itself. The other challenge, I guess, is the range of learner experience, right? I mentioned this as well. There's a wide range of different backgrounds, and you're often on the same workshop, within the same workshop. They could be grouped together by ability. I know shell, I don't know shell, for example, or even by research area. We've got a training course that's full of bioinformaticians. We've got a training course that's full of economists. And there's flexibility, so therefore there's flexibility required in the topics that you train people on with HPC Carpentry. But you do want to maintain some sort of coherency and avoid maintenance overhead, right? You don't want to write a bespoke course every time you have to deliver it, because you just can't manage that level of overhead. And you want to maintain coherency in both in the carpentry style and approach, and in HPC Carpentry in particular, and ensure that you understand the dependencies between the different parts of the course that you can maybe swap in or swap out. And as I said before, we're planning to use a modular approach with recommended configuration. So here's an example of workshops we've put together using these modules. So where are we up to now? They were the sort of, what is it? What are the goals of HPC Carpentry? Where have we actually got to? Well, as I mentioned, HPC Carpentry has been knocking around for quite a while now. The thing that's changed, I guess, over the last year or so is there's been a bit of a coming together of the community with a drive to focus on one location and deliver HPC Carpentry from one location, so people know where they're contributing and don't feel like their effort's being wasted. So the original two instances that existed were HPC Intro, which was produced by Compute Canada, and they put a lot of work into it, and HPC in a Day, which was produced by Peter Steinbach from Germany. And he'd also put a lot of effort into making very good courses. And both of these courses, both of these instances of HPC Carpentry had been taught a few times, had been taught quite a lot, had a lot of practical experience in them, so you didn't really want to throw away either of them. So people got together and they had to look at the difference, or we had to look at the differences between them. So the different topics that were covered in the two things. So HPC Intro included an introduction to Bash Shell, but HPC in a Day from Peter didn't. Both of them covered why you'd want to use HPC, login and data transfer, software modules, the scheduler, file systems, shared system etiquette. But then Peter's course, HPC in a Day, covered parallelism and profiling, which wasn't covered in the HPC Intro course. So you can see what the obvious thing to do here is, and I think after a lot of discussion about the actual details of this, the devil is in the detail of it. Everybody who's involved in this, both Compute Canada, as you saw at the start, are involved in this discussion and part of the maintainers, and so is Peter here. They decided to focus on the common set of topics here would be the core HPC Intro module, and then there would be a separate module for teaching the Bash Shell associated with HPC, and potentially a separate module for the parallelism side of things at the end. So we decided that, or the community decided that half-day modules were about the right size of things. The two instances that existed already had been taught both in, well, HPC in a Day, particularly in a Day format, and HPC Intro had been taught, I think, in both a Day format and as two-day workshops. But half-day modules seemed the natural chunk size for putting these together. So the half-day modules that exist at the moment, or are coming into existence at the moment, are HPC Shell, which is an introduction to Bash, based on the material that Compute Canada already had in HPC Intro. HPC Intro covered all the other topics from HPC Intro as well, but without the Bash start. with hopefully the relevant material from HPC in a day merged in. So it was taking the best bits of the material from both instances and pushing them together into one module. We also had a hack session, a few hours, at Carpentry Con in Dublin this year, where quite a few people who were there got together and put together some improvements and additional material that was missing from both HPC in a day and HPC Intro. So including in those contributions from those people at the hack session in Carpentry Con into this HPC Intro module. Compute Canada also had another set of materials around using Python for computational pipelines, and they're also going to be split up into half-day modules. But I'm not going to talk about those today because they're still under the. I know less about them because I've mostly been involved in the intro level material rather than the Python material. But if you're interested, the links I'll share at the end provide more information on the Python, using Python HPC and using Python for computational pipelines on HPC. And the idea is this gives us the potential to add additional modules if other topics are required. So, for example, Peter's additional material on parallelism and profiling may be useful for some communities, but not for others. You may want to run a longer workshop where you clip together more of these half-day modules or not. And the idea is that the initial release of this structure will be later in 2018. So hopefully around the time of supercomputing, potentially if we get a lot of contributions and people have a lot of free time, it'll be before then. There's a chance for it to slip a bit later in 2018 from that as well. But the idea is once it's in this format with these half-day modules with the recommended way of putting it together, then it's in a position where people can contribute and know that their contributions won't be lost or won't be in vain because they're on the wrong version of HPC Carpentry. There'll just be one canonical place for contribution and maintenance. So I talked a bit about automation and using automation to make things easier, particularly for different systems in the first instance. So the HPC in a day material from Peter includes technology to allow us to switch between different systems, login hosts and schedulers by setting config options. So within the configuration file for when you build the lesson, you just say, oh, I'm using Slurm scheduler, my login host is called X, and the login address is Y. And it automatically goes through all the material and pushes it into the right places for you and changes all the examples to be Slurm. I think the other option you had in there was for PBS Pro. Because HPC Carpentry lessons are all built using Jekyll, which is a website building technology, it's actually, I find it as an old HPC guy, quite comforting because it's like building your website using Make. Right? So if you've not come across Jekyll before, it's like building websites using Make, and the configuration file lets you swap in various parameters. So our plan at the moment is to incorporate this into HPC Intro, the half-day module, where most of the changes will be, most of the system-specific stuff is. And this technology could be expanded to allow automatic switching of other things. For example, we could have examples from particular research areas. I mentioned that already. Different file system setups. So depending on how successful it is in HPC Intro, and from Peter's in a day, it has been very successful for him. Then I think there's the potential to expand this sort of approach to do other things automatic, which may prove very useful. So we've also made some progress with governance of HPC Carpentry, and this is really crucial for maintaining both the momentum in the development and also ensuring the quality of the contributions doing quality assurance of contributions going forward. So there's an initial group of maintainers, which is essentially the list I showed at the start of this presentation, have been formed. We still need to assign specific maintainers for each lesson, but that should hopefully be done within the next month, and they'll have overall responsibility for ensuring that contributions to that lesson are moderated properly. There's been some draft guidance on using HPC Carpentry lessons, which will go up on the website soon, and also a policy on accepting contributions from the community, which will go up on the website soon as well. And hopefully we're planning to just use this and try and spread it out as widely as we can amongst the community while maintaining focus to try and keep the momentum going and make sure that HPC Carpentry is as useful as possible for everybody in the future. So we've also now, as I mentioned, there's a number of different varieties, branches of HPC Carpentry. There are now some canonical locations for things based on actually on the Compute Canada repositories. So there's the website, which Compute Canada originally produced, which is going to be used for this. There's a discussion list based within the carpentries where people can get, which is useful to sign up to if you want to keep abreast of what's going on with HPC Carpentry, ask questions about it, ask for help in using it. If you've got comments on feedback or just any general questions, that's the place to go for that. And there's also the repositories themselves. As I mentioned, because there are a number of different lessons, which eventually will be the half-day lessons, there's a number of different specific repositories in there for those different lessons. But this is the place to go if you have any issues that you want to raise around HPC Carpentry. So you can discuss them on HPC or on the list, or you can even raise them as issues on the specific repository if you think there's something missing or something should be added, or you want to raise a point around those lessons. So how can you get involved? Hopefully you're here because you wanted to learn a bit more. Hopefully I potentially inspired you a little bit to get involved, or that HPC Carpentry is a good and useful thing for the community as a whole. And obviously the more people who are involved, the better it is. The better the lessons will be, the better the material will be, and the more useful it'll be for the community going forward, and also then for the researchers. So there's a number of different ways to get involved. You can teach it, right? Just take the HPC Carpentry material and teach it. There's a few of us who have experience of teaching it already who'd be more than happy to help you out if you have any specific questions on the material. But the material is there. You can take it and teach it. The guidelines on how to use it will be up on the website shortly. But in the meantime, you can use it as it is. So, and then please provide feedback on how it can be improved, right? What went wrong? What was good? What was bad? Did you have any really good ideas about how to teach a particular topic? This is hopefully how we can grow going forward. And a little PS is, please don't forget to tell us that you're planning to teach it. Not because we want to come down and control what everybody's doing in a harsh way, but actually to justify HPC Carpentry going forward and to use it as much as possible and to raise the profile as much as possible. It really helps us to know who's teaching it, when, where, and how. And actually, we may also have had contact from other people in that location or that around that area would be interested in coming along to such a lesson. So being able to advertise it in that way is useful. You can help develop HPC Carpentry. As I said, get involved with developing it. So join and contribute to the mailing list. The Discuss HPC mailing list within the Carpentries is the first place to start there. And contribute to the repository. And honestly, we welcome all sorts of contributions. So that's both in terms of content. If you have some really good ideas of how to improve the content, that's just great. Please fork the repository, issue pull requests, all those sort of things. But if you spot something and you just want to raise an issue for people to discuss, or you think there's a problem, or you think that something could be improved specifically, but you don't have the time to do it yourself, then we're also more than happy to take people just raising issues and getting involved in that way. And that's great as well, right? We can't promise we've got the manpower to address every issue that everybody ever raises, but having that note there helps improve HPC Carpentry going forward. And finally, we're also really keen to have as wide group of people involved in maintaining HPC Carpentry. So that's getting involved with being on the maintenance list, helping the group write proposals for things such as supercomputing sessions, supercomputing BOFs, events, getting involved in different events around the world and things like that. Also being moderators and maintainers for particular lessons and moderating the contributions to them. If you're really keen to get involved in maintaining and being involved in helping push HPC Carpentry forward and adding in new lessons and all those sort of things, we're really keen to have people involved, as many people as possible who are keen to be involved. That's just great. What I would say personally, that most of the people, in fact, That's true. All of the people who I listed at the start, I hadn't met before I got involved in HPC Carpentry, and they've just been a great bunch of people to work with, an inspiring bunch of people. So if you've got any thoughts about being involved in maintenance, the people involved are just really great people to work with. So I would definitely sell it that way. So we also have a list for the maintainers, which is essentially an invite list. It's not an open discussion list like the Discuss HPC, but you can mail the list and let people know that you're interested in being involved in maintaining HPC Carpentry, and we're more than happy to have you and find useful things for you to do that match the sort of areas you're interested in. Okay, so that's my sort of whirlwind tour. Apologies if I've gone through a bit too fast. I tend to speak a bit quickly because I'm originally from Liverpool, and that's one of the treats of people from that area. But I've got so there's plenty of time for questions. There's the links to the website and to the discussion list, and also a link at the end to this presentation online if you want to take it, review the slides again, so you come up with any questions, or even use it yourself in the future. So yes, I'm happy to take any questions.
So you're welcome to unmute yourself to ask a question verbally, or you can post it in the group chat, and Andy, I'll pass that on to Andy. So in order to talk, if you go to the participants list, you can unmute yourself. One question that just came in is, does the discussion board provide info for how trainers can learn how to use the materials?
So not yet, I guess not specifically in the discussion list. If you asked a question to the discussion, to the mailing list, then you'd get plenty of replies, I think, back pointing you at the relevant information.
I have a follow-on question then. Do you expect in the future, as more people get involved, to have sort of guidelines for teaching that might be added to the site?
Yeah, so one of the things that we want to add, as well as the material itself, is guidelines about how to put the material together and how to put together a useful workshop, a coherent workshop, using the different modules. And each of the individual lessons, the individual modules within the HPC Carpentry will have its own specific instructor notes as well. There are some there for some of the stuff that's been there a bit longer, but that's one of the areas that could use more development, and that's certainly been noted. So we're definitely keen to have more information there.
Are there other questions? Again, you have to unmute yourself if you want to ask verbally, because I muted everybody because of some ancillary noise, or you can put something in the chat window. Just a note thanking you for the presentation.
So the other thing I'd say is we are currently submitting a follow-on Birds of a Feather session for Supercomputing 18 this year. So if you happen to be going along to SC and you're interested in HPC Carpentry and meeting the people and getting involved, hopefully, fingers crossed, we get accepted. We did last time, so hopefully there's a chance we will this time as well. That'll be a good place to have discussions. In fact, even if we don't get accepted, I think we'll probably be meeting up somewhere in a coffee room, or at some point that'll be advertised over the Discuss HPC list. So whether they'll have us or not, we'll sort something out for SC.
Okay. Other questions? Just for your information, this session is recorded, and the link to the recording will be posted to the SIGHPC education website. That's sighpceducation.acn.org within a couple of days, and it'll be up on the Share SIGHPC Education YouTube channel. Is where it will get posted. For those of you who are members, I will send the link out to the members list, but you can go to the events page at the chapter website to find that link if you're not a member.
I think.
Go ahead. There's another question. How many sessions have you hosted, and what would you recommend for people wanting to use the materials for teaching?
Okay, so myself, I've run one session, which was down in Leeds in the north of England, and but Compute Canada and Peter have both run lots and lots of sessions. They're probably a better place to answer this sort of question than I am. What I would say is understand your audience, right, is the key thing, because that determines how you put the material together and how much emphasis you put on the different things. So one of the things we always do with carpentries is issue pre-course questionnaires that we try and get in at least a week before we run the workshops themselves. And they include questions on what sorts of level of expertise and competence, technical competence the attendees have. You can see examples on the Carpentry's, the Software Carpentry on the Carpentry's website of what their pre-course questionnaires look like. And this gives you an idea of how you should focus your workshop. And I think the other thing, a bit of advice I have, is that don't be a slave to the schedule on the workshop, right? The key is to make it useful and interesting for the researchers on. So if that means deviating from the schedule, you have to miss bits of the workshop out for some reason because people want to focus on another thing. I think that's my other experience, is go where the researchers and the people on the course want you to go, not where you think it has to be because of the schedule.
So somebody had a comment that participants often have different levels of expertise. How do you deal with that?
So one way we've dealt with that is for the people who are, you'd hope actually that you want to go at the slowest pace for the people who are at that level of expertise. And then we use the people who are maybe moving a bit faster and a bit more expertise. We sort of co-opt them as additional helpers in the workshop. Because one of the features, again, of carpentry is that you can never have enough helpers on the workshop. So having the people who are more expert say to them, oh, well, can you find yourself somebody who's struggling a bit more maybe, and pair up with them and help explain and help them out. Actually, that benefits them as well, because I guess in my experience, there's nothing like trying to explain something to a novice to pick holes in your mental model of what's going on and how you understand it. So actually then the people who maybe would find it a bit slow otherwise suddenly getting more from the workshop because they're improving their model of how things work by explaining it to people who have less understanding.
Okay, are there any final questions?
One actual other bit of advice I think that I've had from running both these workshops and other ones is we've often found it useful to add an extra half day on the end of the workshop, if at all possible, and just use that as a sort of bootstrapping people's use of HPC. So that's where they can ask the much more specific questions about their research, about how can HPC help my research? How can I get started? Where can I get access? What are the next steps for me? We found that very useful for giving people, then they've got both the knowledge from the workshop, hopefully, which they'll digest over time and build on, and that specific advice is what's the next step for them in using HPC or high throughput computing or cloud computing or whatever they want to use.
Excellent. Well, Andy, I don't see any further questions, so I'd like to thank you very much for holding this webinar. I think it's very interesting, and it's an important step forward in HPC training. And so thank you again. And
thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Very good. So thank all of those who have attended today, and keep your eyes out for future webinars. And thank you again, Andy.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.